Hello and welcome to Yerushalmi Peah, Daf Dalid, in the Ozvater print. A couple of catch-up ha'aras and then a couple of ha'aras on the Daf. I think you'll find them interesting, but it might be a little bit longer today than usual because I have a couple of questions that came in. So one of them is that I had quoted this Chazal about Lashon Hara Keneged Kulam. So it's actually in the Tosefta of Peah, which is very, very important. And I just want to read you Tosefta Peah, Perik Aleph, Aleph through a couple. It's kedai to take a look inside. Elu Dvarim she'en lahem shir hapeah v'abikurin v'arayon v'gemilas chasadim v'talmud Torah. It doesn't say Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam there. Peah yesh lo shir milmata. There's a bare minimum. Ve'en la shir milmala. Which again, this is just interesting in contrast to the Gemara. Ha'osa kol sedeu peah. If you try to make your whole field peah, eno peah, which we had in the Gemara. Base elo dvarim nifram in adam bolam hazav v'karen kamis olam haba. These are bad things. In contrast to the Mishnah that listed good things. Not surprisingly, these are three terrible sins. I kind of wonder if they're keneged Peah, Bikorin, Rayon, and Gemilas Chasadim. And then it says Va'al Lashon Hara keneged Kulam. Lashon Hara, which is obviously keneged Torah. The Gra says that the taiva for Bittul Torah is Lashon Hara. It represents that, etc., etc. Not for now, but that's very, very fascinating. Lashon Hara keneged Kulam. Chavetz Chaim brings this Ma'amar Chazal down, obviously, in his amazing sefer. The more you learn halachas about Lashon Hara throughout Shas, the more you see that literally Kol Razlo, honestly, he knew everything and really, really incorporated so much there. Now, then Oz Gimel, again, it's just fascinating. Zechus yesh lo keren v'yesh lo peros, which is reminiscent of the Mishnah. When a person does something good, there's a keren, a principle, and a fruit that comes. Shenamar, imru tzadiki tov ki pri ma'aleim yochelu, aver yesh lo keren ve'en lo peros, which is very, very fascinating. Shenamar, oy la rasha ra ki gomor yadav yasalo. Amani mekayim v'yochel mipri darcham. It says there is pri. Ella avera she'osa peros yesh lo peros. If it, I can't even explain this really. If the avera caused more ripple effect, then he is paid back with that ripple effect. V'she'eno osa peros ein lo peros. B'achshava tov and Sarf Lamai says Dalid ayin sham. Just those first four. It's kedai to see it inside. There's various so to speak thing, but that's the Lashon Hara Keneged Kulam that Chazal say, which is Keneged Torah. Just that part about Torah, right? So the Gra writes that every word is a mitzvah say by itself. And the Shmeres Chaim or Scheinberg has a whole shtickle on this. I believe it's the first one, Ayin Sham, if you want some interesting raid. Also, the Chavetz Chaim is very famous that he used a stopwatch, which was a commodity back then. There's a famous story that I heard from Rabbi Klein, Rav Nachman Klein Zatzal, who was a Talmud Muvak of Rav Ruderman in Eretz Yisrael, and he said that he heard this story from, I forgot where he got it from, but basically the Chavetz Chaim's wife wanted to get chairs in the house, so they used to have like a picnic bench that they sat on. I don't think it had a back on it, and she wanted to get like chairs. So she said to him, let's replace our chairs and get something better. So he said to her, what do we need that for? So she said, well, you took me to Chaim Ozer, and he had a nice dining room set, but covered. So Chavetz Chaim looked at her in shock and said, how could you compare me to Rechaim Ozer? Rechaim Ozer is Malchus, and he's not Nena from it, and he's a leader of Klal Yisrael, and he has to entertain people in his house, so it's Kavod Torah. You should have that. So then the Chavetz Chaim said that, Chas v'shalom, we don't need this. We're going to want Mosros. We're going to want wallpaper next, and then we're going to want a wall clock. Chas v'shalom, we don't need these things. But anyway, the Chavetz Chaim says that he timed it. I think he says that he got 200 words per minute. So in 1 minute, a person could do Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. So Scheinberg, he has a whole shtickle on that in this Mishmeres Chaim. But basically, he says that one of the reasons that Torah is Keneged Kulam is because there's no other mitzvah that you're doing this. When you shake lulav, you get one mitzvah, right? But when you learn Torah, literally in 1 minute, you can do 200 mitzvahs. So there's nothing that has a greater reward and benefit than Talmud Torah. And of course, Talmud Torah is Keneged Kulam because it is so important. It's the most important mitzvah that the whole world stands on. We're not finished with ours. Somebody told me that I don't know Chumash, which very well could be. I'm not so insulted because, like Tosas and Baba Kama says, the Tanam and Amram sometimes had problems with quoting Psukim, whatever that means. But anyway, he's actually right and wrong, meaning that I said that Peah is found in Parshas Emor, and he said it's in Kedoshim, so we're actually both right. There's two Psukim, and it's Kedai. I'm happy that he corrected me because I forgot to quote a very, very interesting Rashi. So basically, I said that it was in Parshas Kedoshim, and I said it's very appropriate that it's there. And why I didn't explain, but what I meant to say was that it's talking about how to be a holy person, and by being a generous nation, like the Chinuch explains that I quoted in Reish, I think it's Yud Zayin, in that mitzvah of Peah, that makes us better people. And so what I was trying to say was that it's in Kedoshim because Kedoshim makes us a holy nation. It's all the ways that we have to be Kadosh and Muvdal, separate from being selfish and from being people that are self-centered and to become more generous people. So it's very apropos. In Parshas Emor, we also find a pasuk in Perek Chaf Gimel, pasuk Chaf Beis. V'kutzrechem es katzir artzchem l'schala pa'as savcha b'kutzrecha v'laki katzir l'salaki l'ani lager tazovo sam ani Hashem lakechem. There's a lot of different laws that are learned from these psukim. I believe I did quote that in the intro as well. But anyway, so Rashi brings down that that it's two lavin. Chazer v'shana lavar leim b'shtei lavin. It's two lavin, which is interesting. Again, the Torah, when the Torah gives two lavin, it's l'chazek inyan to show us that something's very, very important. Amar Rav Dimi Rabbi Yosef. Now he's asking from the context. We know Emor is always, we quoted this earlier. If you were with us in Brachos, Emor is always the Moadim. So what in the world, in the middle of the Moadim, it's telling us about these things? So if you think about it, the Pashat reason, it needs to be explained why specifically it comes right before Chodesh Hashvi V'Echad L'Chodesh Shavas Zichron Shura, but right before Rosh Hashanah, and right after Lechem Bikurim, which is, I believe, Shavuot. So it's in the middle. I believe I have a pshat, but let me first read what Rashi says. So Rashi says, why is it put here? Pesach B'Atzeres Mikan. It's Pesach B'Atzeres Mikan, and then Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the Chag and Sukkot Mikan. La'amedcha shekol anosin lekashich l'peah. If you give these things, la'ani karoi properly, malin olav, the Torah considers ki'ilu bana beis hamikdash v'ikar of karbonos betocho, which is these psukim are talking about the karbonos of the Yom Tovim. So it's as if you brought that. This is the Torah's Kohen and Perek Yud Gimel Os Yud Beis. So this is what Chazal are saying. Very, very brilliant. And again, Rashi seems to be saying it's right in between these because it's right smack in the middle, and the whole idea of karbonos is surrounded by it. The middle is always what everything revolves around, like the famous Gra on the Vav of Gachon, which is the belly and the middle, etc. Okay, in the middle of the Torah, according to the Gemara Kedushin. So I believe that the pshat is like this: that the whole purpose of a Torah, which is what Shavuos is, and Rosh Hashanah, which is also Rosh Hashanah for physical and spiritual, it all depends on you being a generous person. That's why Rekiva says we have to rechamach zek kal gadol b'Torah. And Idach Pirushu, Zil Gemar, this literally is one of the Makaros for it, because here you see it's telling you to be a kind person, and your whole life revolves around those two things. Those things. Your whole spiritual life of Shavuos and your whole physical life of Rosh Hashanah. That's decided then. So I believe that that's the remez here. That's how I understand it. So thank you for the person that corrected me on my lack of Chumash knowledge. I had forgotten about that Rashi there, but it's a very, very fascinating Rashi. That why is it as if you built the Beis Hamikdash? Also, maybe because some of the karbanos have to do with because the carbon is meant to like the Ramban says, it's meant to break your ego. Okay, we haven't even started our page, so one more quick thing from the Noda B'Yehuda that I couldn't skip is that it says Chita Achas Poter everything for when you give Trumas and Maasros, really make our din Chita Achas is Poter. So the Noda B'Yehuda says a very fascinating thing in Yordea, that he says no one ever said this before me, which Agav, we found Rishonim that they have said this, including the Tosas reading Kedushin and Daf Nun Ches, which is amazing to know that he was Machavim to Rishonim, but he says no one ever said this, which also shows that he had Bekias and everything that was, all the known Torah was known to Noda B'Yehuda. But he says a Gevaldik Diak. He says, yes, when you give Chita Achas, it's true, Midoraisa, it's not Tevel anymore, but you weren't really put to the Kri. You didn't really do the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to be generous. And so again, Chita Achas is Poter, yeah, but you did it, but you didn't do the mitzvah properly. And that's a brilliant art in general when we talk about tzedakah. And that actually leads us to today's blot. So I hope it was worthwhile that it was lengthy. So a couple of quick ha'aras, but they all tie into this. So the Gemara actually says explicitly, Gemilas Chasadim, that when the Mishnah says Gemilas Chasadim, what does that refer to? Hada the Tema Begufa, that's with your body. Avu b'mamono yesh l'shir. Actually, with your money, there is a limitation as to how much you could give. Okay? And this is like Rav Shimon ben Lakish, the name of Yehuda ben Chanina, Nimnu ba'usha. Now listen to these words because they're very different than the Bavli. Shehei adam mafresh chomesh min chasav l'mitzvah. That a person should separate a maximum, well, I'm adding that word, of a fifth of his possessions for the mitzvah. Now, one second. If you know what the Gemara, what the Bavli says, this is not what the Bavli says at all. The Bavli, when it describes Usha, says, Al Yavaz ve'ez yoser chomesh. You're not allowed to give more than a chomesh. Now, let's just zoom out for a second. We all know that we actually give tzedakah. And again, I misquoted. I said the Chazon Ish says you're putter from these matanos in the fields. I didn't explain fully. First of all, the Shulchan Aruch says that you're putter. But the Shulchan Aruch says that it's because the aniyim are not matzoi. So if the aniyim are matzoi, then you would be chaya. But the Chazon Ish explains that people have bread, but they need money for their living expenses, and that's a Chazon Ish, what he kind of adds and explains better. And also, like the Shulchan Aruch and the Chazon Ish point out, again, that if you left it in the field, then he says that the Goyim would take it. So, and again, there is a mitzvah of giving tzedakah Goyim as well. But this is a real extra amount. Now let's and this is mostly meant to support the Jewish people. Ani ircha kodim, and our family comes first, etc. So let's just say a quick thing. So when we talk about Meiser, so we give a tenth. So let's say you made $100,000 this year. So I'm very bad at math. Let's say you got $1,000 paycheck. So Meiser so we know that you give we know that you would give $100 for Meiser, which out of that 1,000 that you made. Now that's a tenth. That's not a fifth. A fifth would be 200 of that. 1/5 is 200, 20%. So there is a movement to give 20% of one's money to tzedakah, and it's chomesh, and there's a whole website for it. I don't know if a person has to sign up on the website in order to get a Olam, but there's a thing, and it's based on the Igeres HaGra. The Igeres HaGra was written by the Gra before he went to Eretz Yisrael, and he tells his wife, please make sure, he actually commands her pretty strongly to make sure that you give a chomesh. And my Rebbe, Rav Asher Rubenstein Zatzal, he always quote this Gra, that it's kedai to, if a person is in a financial place to be able to do it, he could give, but also that according to some, he said it was according to the Gra, the bracha of Arikosim Lachem bracha abli dai, which we had earlier, right? We had a similar drasha of dai. So that bracha, that aser b'shvil shetisaser, actually only refers to someone who gives the chomesh. That bracha, Hashem says, I'll make you rich, b'chanudi gam v'zos, is only if you give the right amount. Now, this is very tricky because for a lot of us, whatever your salary is, if you're making $100,000 a year and you're giving away $10,000 tzedakah, that's very significant versus $20,000 a year of Meiser money. But it's an amazing thing to think about, just Yisrael Kadoshim and how we want to do mitzvahs. So, but the problem here is that the Bavli actually says that al yivaz es yoser mechomesh, you're not allowed to give more than a fifth of your property. And here it seems to be saying literally shehei adam mafresh chomesh minchasav lemitzvah, that a person should give it. So this is a huge problem, and we'll come back and explain it. And it's kedai to spend some time on it because it is very relevant about how we give tzedakah. Okay, so let's try to make sense out of it. Okay, so how do we make sense out of it? So a couple of interesting ha'aras. So one of them is that the Gra in Shnos Eliyahu actually says that this 1/5 maximum is biblical. It literally, he says it's Midoraisa. What about Usha, where they were skinu this? He explains that it was forgotten and they brought it back. And he has a whole problem in this Gemara because the Gemara says that b'mamono yesh lo shir, that his money has a shir, so that's not mentioned in the Mishnah. So the problem with the Gra is that the Mishnah is not discussing kindness with your money because that does have a minimal share. So how you fit the Gra in and how you fit the Pashup Shot in needs to be explained, but that is one of the problems because what's the Mishnah saying? That with your money that has a measure, if Midoraisa it really doesn't. But Midoraisa does, it seems to. So how you explain the Gra is beyond the scope of this conversation, but just keep that in mind that that's part of what the Gra is being Medayik. So I want to say like this: the Rambam in his commentary on the Mishnayos basically says that in Usha they required a person to separate a fifth of his possessions. Now, and then he even illustrates this, which we'll see is actually the key to understanding according to the Chavetz Chaim, which is brilliant. He says that if someone bumps into a poor man in need of food or clothing, it's an avera to give him less than the fifth. So you have to give it. Wow, so that's amazing. So the Chavetz Chaim in Avos Chesed, which is an amazing sefer about just being kind and about tzedakah, in a footnote in Perek Yotes, so he resolves this and he says like this. He says there are two different takanas of Usha. He said one of them is a general klal that one is not supposed to give away more than a fifth of his possessions, and that's talking about just in general if you want to give tzedakah. That's talking about where no one's coming to collect, there's no need in front of you. However, if a person sees aniyim that are in front of him that literally need the money, then you're mechuyev to give away a fifth of your property to give it to them. And a fifth doesn't mean a fifth of what you have left, and a fifth of what, because the Gemara itself explains that it's a fifth of your karen once it comes in, and then a fifth of profits of extra stuff that come in, which is important. The Gemara explains it before, but you need that to be said. Yerushalmi is saying, you have an obligation to give people even more. So therefore, when the Vilna Gaon wrote in his Igeris to his wife that please make sure that you always give a fifth, that's because people in Vilna were abjectly poor. His wife ran a tzedakah fund, right? Kiyadua. So she was always encountering poor people who were literally, begging her for money. There's a famous story with the Gra and his wife and a friend that made a deal that they would come back. Not for right now. But anyway. So that's what the Gra is saying. That the Gra is saying that when somebody is actively in need, then you have a chiyuv to give away a fifth of your principal and then profit. And that's an amazing thing. That's how Chafetz Chaim reconciles it. So the takeaway from here, I know it was long, but basically we're trying to become generous people who love Hashem and love doing mitzvahs and love others. So let's take a moment to think about our tzedakah habits as we learn through Peah. And instead of looking, I remember when I ran a kitchen in a certain yeshiva, and there was a very rich person that came to me and said, I worked out with the yeshiva that I'm sponsoring. I'm giving a couple of people that don't have money, I'm giving them Shabbos meals. And I thought that was amazing. And he came in. He was a very, very wealthy person, and he showed me that, okay, you're going to be making a fish platter. Basically, like, okay, here's 10 names of people that need it. Here's, $100. Go buy some gefilte fish, make it, and deliver it. That was it. And I remember judging and saying, like, what in the world? I was young and I was immature. But then at that moment, I actually had a very important einfall. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm judging this guy that I think he could afford more. Maybe he can't, right? We all know the Kala Rabasi story about Rabbi Tarfon, that Rabbi Akiva told him you could afford more. It wasn't that Rabbi Tarfon wasn't giving tzedakah. Rabbi Akiva said that you could do more. So I looked at him and I said, you could do more. And then I said to myself, stop looking at other people. Try to look at yourself and try to figure out the most generous that you could do. And there's lots to work on in that domain that I don't need to be looking at other people. Anyway, I hope this was interesting for you about Chumash, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks for joining me.